It was our anniversary, 12 years married, and to be honest, the last two hadn't been easy. But tonight I thought we could find our way back. I'd planned every detail, weeks in advance. Picked the restaurant she'd always loved, that little Italian place downtown with the big windows that looked out over the skyline. The same place we'd gone on our third anniversary, back when she used to reach for my hand without thinking. I even called ahead to reserve the exact table by the window, the one in the corner, away from the noise, with the best view of the city lights. I went all out, too. Ordered her favorite bottle of wine, a Cabernet from Napa she used to rave about, and asked the staff to tie a ribbon around the neck of the bottle, just to make it feel special. I bought her a gift, too. Not flowers, not chocolates, something that actually meant something. A necklace. A simple gold chain with a small pendant engraved with our wedding date. I thought maybe when she opened it, she'd remember how far we'd come. When I walked into the restaurant that night, I actually felt hopeful. I hadn't felt that way in a while. She was already there, sitting at the table, hair perfect. That red dress I'd bought her for her birthday a few years back. She smiled at me when she saw me, that same smile that used to light me up inside. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself believe this was it. Tonight was the night we turned things around. She stood up when I reached the table. I kissed her cheek. She smelled like that vanilla perfume she wears when she's trying. And I thought to myself, she's trying too. Maybe she feels the same. The waiter came over right away, poured the wine. The city outside looked alive, headlights gliding through the streets, buildings glowing. We sat down, and I caught her looking out the window, her face soft in the light. And in that moment, I let myself imagine it. That we'd sit here, drink the wine, talk about old times, laugh a little. That she'd look at me the way she used to. That we'd go home and start again. That we'd be okay. Because despite everything, the cold shoulder, the night she came home late, the way she flinched when I touched her lately, I still loved her. I still wanted to believe we could fix it. I had my little speech ready in my head. Something about how much we'd been through, how much I still believed in us, how we could still be those people we were in that tiny chapel in Vegas 12 years ago. As I sat there, watching her smile at the waiter, tucking her hair behind her ear, I told myself, tonight, we start over. Tonight, she remembers why she chose me. So I raised my glass, my hand barely trembling, and said softly, just loud enough for her to hear over the music, to us. And she smiled back, that same smile. And I thought, maybe, just maybe, she meant it too. Halfway through dinner, just as the waiter brought out the wine, I'd asked them to chill for us. I started my little speech. I raised my glass, took a breath. I was about to tell her everything I'd rehearsed in my head on the drive over. But before I could even open my mouth, she set her fork down, folded her hands in her lap, and said in the calmest, most collected voice, I've been cheating on you for 2 years, and I'm leaving you. That's it. No hesitation, no cracking in her voice, no tears. Just facts. Like she was reading the specials off a menu. For a second, I thought maybe I misheard her, that she was making some cruel joke. My mind actually paused, waiting for her to laugh and say she was kidding. But her eyes didn't move. They stayed locked on mine, cold, steady. And in that moment, it felt like the floor tilted, like the whole world went sideways. My fingers froze around the stem of my glass. My stomach sank, my chest burned. Inside, I felt like someone had just driven a steel rod through me. But outside, nothing. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. I smiled. I smiled so wide I even surprised myself. I raised my glass higher just like I'd planned and said, well then, to your new life. And I clinked my glass against hers. Her hand actually jerked a little at the sound. That was the first crack in her armor. I saw the smallest flicker of confusion in her face, like she'd expected me to explode, or cry, or beg her to stay. But I didn't. I took a long, deliberate sip of wine, set the glass down, and leaned back in my chair. Her confident little smile faltered for the first time all night. And right then, staring at her across that perfect table, I thought to myself, oh, you didn't expect this. You really didn't see this coming. And for the first time in months, I finally felt like I had the upper hand. I let her sit there, alone at the table, while I stood outside and let the night air cool my face. I pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket, scrolled to the contact labeled Steve, lawyer, and hit call. He picked up on the second ring. It's time. I said flatly. He didn't ask me what I meant. Steve was good at his job. He just said, "Send me everything you've got. I'll have the paperwork ready by morning." "Thanks," I muttered, already scrolling to the next number. This time, it was Rob, P.I. Robert had been keeping tabs on her for months. Ever since I started noticing the signs, the late nights at work, the phone she always kept face down, the sudden distance between us. When he answered, his tone was almost casual. "So, she finally said it?" "She finally said it." I confirmed. "You want the full package?" "Everything," I replied. "Send it to me, and have it ready for court." "You got it," he said. I hung up and stared out at the city lights, letting myself replay everything that had led to this. The first night she came home late, claiming she was just grabbing drinks with the girls, but she smelled like someone else's cologne. The text I'd seen by accident, just a name and a smiley face. The way she flinched when I touched her. I thought I was imagining things at first, but I knew her. I knew when something was wrong. So I'd called Robert, asked him to find out the truth, and he did. Photos of them laughing together at some cafe, slipping into a hotel on a Tuesday night, sitting in a car in the dark, her head on his shoulder. I even had the receipts, the timestamps, and a few recordings of them whispering to each other like teenagers. All of it, cataloged neatly in a manila folder waiting for the day I'd need it. That day was tonight. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, took a deep breath, and straightened my jacket. When I walked back inside, it was like nothing had happened. She looked up at me, startled, like she expected me to come back red-faced and raging. Instead, I smiled, sat down, took another sip of my wine, and for the first time all evening, I saw her start to squirm. When I slid back into my seat, she was scrolling through her phone, thumbs moving quickly, her lips tight, probably texting him her escape plan. I sat there for a few minutes, quietly sipping my wine and watching her from across the table. She kept avoiding my eyes, tucking her hair behind her ear like she always did when she was nervous. Then, right on cue, the bell above the restaurant door chimed. I didn't even have to look up. I already knew who it was. I had planned this moment down to the last detail. Her eyes flicked to the door, then froze. All the color drained from her face, and for the first time all evening, she looked afraid. I glanced toward the entrance casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world, and saw him standing there, Eric. He looked nervous, but trying to play it cool, like he didn't quite know where to go. He scanned the room, caught sight of her, and smiled faintly. Poor guy really thought he'd been invited to a romantic little meeting. I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked toward him. "Eric?" I said warmly, extending a hand. He blinked at me, completely confused, but shook my hand anyway. Yeah," he muttered. "Hi, you must be her husband." I finished for him. My smile didn't waver. His hand went limp in mine. "She didn't tell you we'd all be dining together?" I asked, tilting my head just enough to let the sarcasm cut. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I gestured toward the table. "Well, no sense standing around. Come on, join us. I even ordered dessert." I led the way back to the table, and he followed, glancing back and forth between me and her like a deer caught in headlights. She sat there motionless, her hands clenched in her lap. When I pulled out a chair for him, she finally spoke, her voice low and sharp. "This is unnecessary," she hissed at me. I ignored her completely. Once he sat, I poured him a glass of wine and pushed it toward him. "You've been seeing my wife behind my back for 2 years, I said evenly. "I figured it was only fair we finally meet." Eric stared at me, eyes wide, then shot her a panicked look. You said you were going to tell him?" he stammered. Her cheeks flushed deep red. "This isn't the time or place," she snapped at him, her voice cracking. I leaned back in my chair, swirling the wine in my glass, and smiled faintly. "On the contrary," I said, "I think this is the perfect time." Eric shifted uncomfortably, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. She, on the other hand, sat frozen, pale and silent, finally realizing the game wasn't hers to control anymore. And I just sat there, savoring every second. The table was quiet now. Quiet in that thick, heavy way where everyone is waiting for someone else to speak. I leaned forward a little, resting my elbows on the white linen. The city lights flickered outside the window behind her, but I didn't care about the skyline anymore. I cared about this moment. Eric sat rigidly across from me, fingers fidgeting with his napkin, his jaw tight. She kept her eyes locked on the table, her knuckles white, where she clutched her hands in her lap. I reached into my inside jacket pocket and set a plain envelope on the table between us. They both looked at it like it might explode. I took a slow sip of my wine before finally breaking the silence. "You know," I began, my tone calm, almost conversational. "I've always admired how organized she was. Even her lies were neatly scheduled." Eric's head jerked up at that, confused. I slid the envelope closer to him. "Go ahead," I said. "Take a look. You'll find your name all over it." He hesitated, then slowly opened it and pulled out the contents. Photos, dozens of them. Her and him, walking out of a hotel hand in hand, sitting in his car, her head on his shoulder, kissing in a parking garage. Receipts, dates, times, screenshots of text messages, all printed neatly and in chronological order. Eric's face went pale as he flipped through them, and his hands started to shake. "You see," I continued, "I've known about you for quite some time, long enough to know she's been lying to you too." That made his head snap up. "What?" he said, his voice cracking. I smirked faintly. "Oh, you didn't know? She told you that this started 6 months ago? That I was cold, distant? That the marriage was over?" I leaned forward, my voice dropping just enough to cut. "She's been saying the same thing to me, playing both sides. But the truth is, she's been at this for 2 years. With you, with a few others before you, I suspect." Eric looked at her, his mouth open but no words coming out. Her eyes finally met his, and I watched the panic start to rise in her chest. "Eric, it's not what he's saying," she stammered. But she couldn't even finish the sentence. He dropped the photos back onto the table like they burned his fingers. "You told me you were trapped," he said, his voice rising. "That you were unhappy. That it was just me. That I was the only one." She shook her head violently, reaching for his arm. "Eric, please." But he pulled away so hard, his chair screeched against the floor. "Don't," he spat. "Don't touch me. Don't you dare." Her lip trembled. And just like that, the air between them cracked. The two of them, who had walked into this restaurant thinking they were united against me, were suddenly two strangers sitting at opposite ends of the table. Eric stood abruptly, knocking his chair back, his eyes darting between us. I need some air," he muttered, already backing toward the door. I didn't stop him. I didn't even look at her as he left. Her eyes followed him helplessly as he disappeared out the door, leaving her alone with me. And for the first time all night, she looked like she might actually break. She sat there, silent now. The man she thought she was leaving me for had bolted out the door like his feet were on fire, leaving her behind with nothing but a cold glass of wine and a pile of evidence she couldn't explain away. I didn't bother saying anything. Instead, I motioned for the waiter. He arrived looking nervous, like even he felt the weight of what had just happened at our table, but still professional enough to set down the check without comment. I slipped my card into the leather folder and handed it back with a polite nod. She started to reach into her purse, almost on instinct, and muttered, "You don't have to." But I cut her off with a wave of my hand. "Don't worry," I said quietly. "This one's on me. Consider it a parting gift." The waiter returned a minute later. I scrawled my signature on the receipt, added a generous tip because none of this was his fault, and stood. She stayed seated, staring at her hands. I slid my jacket over my shoulders and adjusted the collar. Then, as I tucked my wallet away, I glanced at her one last time and said, with just the faintest trace of a smirk, "You should go after him. Wouldn't want to lose him and me in the same night, would you?" Her glare could have cut steel, but she didn't move. Good. I left her there at the table alone and stepped out into the cool night. The air outside was crisp and sharp, almost bracing. The sounds of the city-distant laughter, the faint wail of a siren somewhere, tires hissing along wet streets, all seemed clearer somehow. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt calm. I leaned against the railing by the curb, pulled my phone out of my pocket, and found Robert's number. He picked up on the first ring. "Yeah?" he said. "It's time," I told him flatly. There was a pause. "All of it." "All of it," I confirmed. "Every file, every photo, every message. Make it public. Tonight." Another pause, then a low whistle. "You got it," he said. "They won't know what hit 'em." "Good," I said simply. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, shoved my hands into my coat, and stood there for a while, watching the city lights shimmer across the dark river. I felt something strange settle in my chest. Not anger, not even satisfaction, just peace. For the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't chasing anything. I was done. It didn't take long. By the time I woke up the next morning, my phone was already buzzing. Emails, texts, missed calls. People had seen it, all of it. The photos, the hotel receipts, the texts between her and Eric. Robert didn't just send them to her and him. He sent them to everyone who needed to know. Family, friends, even a few of her coworkers. The reaction was swift. By noon, the group chat we shared with mutual friends had gone silent. Her name vanished from social media profiles. People we'd known for years, couples we'd had over for dinner, families we vacationed with stopped returning her calls. By the end of the week, she was let go from her job. Unbecoming conduct, they called it. Officially, of course, it was some nonsense about company values, but everyone knew. The photos made sure of that. Even Eric wasn't answering her anymore. I heard through a friend that he'd packed up and moved back to his hometown 2 days after the dinner, left her holding the bag. And yet, she kept calling me. The first few times I let it ring, but she didn't stop. On the fourth night, I finally picked up. Her voice cracked before she even finished my name. Marcus? I didn't say anything. Just let her speak. How could you do this? She demanded. Why are you trying to ruin me? Haven't you done enough? That one made me laugh. Me? I said finally. My voice was quiet, steady. You did this to yourself. I just took the mask off. She went quiet on the other end. You destroyed our marriage long before I ever touched a damn thing, I added. Don't call it revenge. Call it the truth. Her breathing was ragged now. I could hear the tears in her throat. People hate me, she whispered. They should, I replied flatly. And then I hung up. She tried a few more times after that. Left voicemails. Long, rambling texts full of apologies and excuses, the same words she should have said years ago, but never did. But I didn't answer again. By the end of the month, she stopped trying. From what I heard later, she moved into a tiny apartment on the other side of town. Alone. Friends gone. Reputation in ashes. And me? I slept better that week than I had in years. The house was smaller. That was the first thing I noticed when I unlocked the door and stepped inside with the kids trailing behind me. It didn't have the marble countertops or the cathedral ceilings of the old place. There was no grand chandelier in the entryway, no sprawling backyard, but it was ours. It smelled like fresh paint and new beginning. The air felt clean here. No ghosts of her perfume lingering in the curtains, no memories of slammed doors echoing down the hall, just quiet. And for the first time in a long time, quiet felt good. The kids ran ahead, their footsteps thumping on the wood floors, their voices echoing in the empty rooms. This is mine, my daughter announced, standing proudly in the doorway of a small bedroom. I smiled faintly and nodded. Yours, I said. We spent the rest of the day unpacking boxes and trying to turn the house into a home. I hung a few pictures, put the coffee pot on the counter, set up their beds, and tucked them in that night under clean sheets. When the house finally went still, I sat at the kitchen table with a beer in my hand and just breathed. There was no her here, no cold glares across the table, no empty excuses or fake smiles. Just me, the kids, and a quiet that didn't hurt anymore. It was the next morning that I met her. I was out front, wrestling with the world's most stubborn lawnmower, when a soft voice behind me called out, "Need a hand?" I turned around to see a woman standing there on the sidewalk, holding a bag of groceries and smiling at me. She was normal. No heavy makeup, no dramatic airs, no thinly veiled contempt in her eyes. Just a simple, kind smile that reached all the way up to her eyes. She nodded toward the mower. "Looks like you're losing the battle," she teased gently. I chuckled, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Yeah, well, it's a work in progress," I admitted. She set her groceries down, crouched next to the mower, and fiddled with the choke. With one firm yank, the engine sputtered to life. "You've just got to show it who's boss," she said, standing and brushing her hands on her jeans. I couldn't help but laugh. "Apparently so. Thanks." She extended her hand. "Emma," she said. I took it. "Marcus." And just like that, no fanfare, no grand declarations, someone good stepped into my life. Someone who didn't know me as him, or her husband, or the guy she cheated on. Just Marcus. And in that quiet morning light, standing in the yard of my new home, I realized maybe starting over wasn't such a bad thing after all. The weeks passed. At first, I was just trying to keep my head above water packing lunches, getting the kids to school, figuring out how to work the dishwasher without breaking it. But something unexpected happened. Life didn't just keep moving, it started to feel lighter. The kids settled into the new house faster than I expected. My son taped drawings all over his bedroom walls. My daughter strung fairy lights above her bed and insisted on baking cookies every weekend, even if half of them burned. And then there was Emma. She kept showing up. At first, it was little things, dropping off a casserole one evening, offering to watch the kids so I could run an errand, lending me her ladder when I decided to clean the gutters. But soon, she was sitting at the kitchen table with us, helping with math homework, listening to my daughter talk about her day like she'd been part of this family all along. She had a way of making everyone feel seen, even me. One evening after dinner, the kids were watching a movie in the living room, and Emma stayed behind to help me clear the table. "You're doing a great job with them," she said, glancing at me as she dried a plate. I gave her a wry smile. "Sometimes it feels like I'm just making it up as I go," I admitted. She set the plate down and met my eyes. "That's what parenting is," she said softly, "and they clearly adore you. That's what counts." For some reason, those words stuck with me long after she left that night. One Saturday morning, I wandered into the garage. It had been months since I'd even stepped in there. The old workbench sat in the corner, covered in dust and half-finished projects. I ran my hand over the worn wood, remembering how I used to spend hours here building tables, shelves, chairs. Back when I still felt like a man who could make something instead of just trying to hold broken pieces together. I grabbed a piece of oak from the stack and set it on the bench. It felt good in my hands, solid, honest. That afternoon, I lost track of time. The rhythmic scrape of sandpaper, the scent of sawdust, the satisfying sound of nails driving home, it all came rushing back. By the time the sun started to set, I had built a simple little coffee table, rough around the edges, but strong. I stood back and stared at it, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Emma showed up the next day, and when she saw the table, her face lit up. "You made that?" she asked, running her hand across the smooth surface. "Yeah," I said, almost shyly. "First one in a long time." She smiled at me, really smiled, and for the first time, I believed her when she said, "You should keep going." So I did. Little by little, my garage turned into a workshop again. Orders started coming in, friends, neighbors, even strangers who'd seen my pieces online. And with every chair, every table, every night spent working with my hands, I felt myself coming back to life. It wasn't just about building furniture. It was about building myself. And this time, I wasn't just holding broken pieces together. I was creating something better, stronger. For me, for my kids, for the life I still had ahead of me. Years passed, and they passed quietly, the kind of quiet you notice because it doesn't hurt anymore. Funny how life keeps moving forward even when you're convinced it won't. The house that once felt like a temporary shelter turned into a home. The front door had scuff marks from kids kicking off muddy shoes. The backyard now had a sturdy wooden treehouse I built with my son one summer. My daughter had strung fairy lights in her room, which glowed softly at night through the hallway. And Emma, she stayed. What began as a kind neighbor offering me a hand with the mower grew into something I couldn't have imagined the night I left Olivia at that restaurant table. Emma was steady. She didn't need to fill the air with noise. She didn't demand explanations or promises. She simply showed up. She became someone the kids trusted, someone I trusted without either of us trying to force it. When I finally asked her to marry me, it wasn't some dramatic speech or a fancy dinner. Just a quiet evening on the porch, her feet tucked under her on the swing. Both of us watching fireflies drift through the yard. "I don't ever want to do any of this without you," I said, sliding a simple ring onto her finger. She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled, the kind of smile that makes you feel like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. "Yes," she said. We married in the backyard the following spring. No tuxedos, no rented ballroom, no awkward toasts. Just us, the kids, and a handful of close friends standing among the tulips and string lights, with the faint scent of freshly cut grass in the air. Her vows were short but perfect. "You fixed things you didn't even break, and you built a life for us all to stand on. So now I stand with you, always." When she finished, I couldn't speak right away. My throat was too tight. The years after that were good. Not perfect, but honest. We worked hard. I built furniture in the garage and eventually opened a little workshop in town. Orders started coming in faster than I could keep up, and the kids would sometimes help sand or paint on weekends. Emma started her own little baking business, and the house always smelled like cinnamon or bread or something sweet. The kids thrived. My son made captain of his soccer team. My daughter painted a mural at school. I finally allowed myself to breathe, to believe it was okay to be happy again. But every so often, the past would find me. A call at night from an unknown number. A text. "It's me. Just wanted to hear your voice." Once, she even sent a letter long, rambling, full of apologies and memories, saying she missed the way things used to be. I never answered, not out of spite, because there was nothing left to say. She'd made her choices, and so had I. One evening, I was out in the garage sanding down a cherry wood table when Emma came in with 2 cups of coffee. She set one next to me and leaned against the workbench, watching me work for a minute before speaking. "Does it ever bother you that she still tries?" I thought about it for a long moment. "No," I said finally, looking up at her. "It's just noise. The real story ended a long time ago." Emma nodded and reached out to touch my arm. "And the new one?" she asked softly. "That one's just getting good," I said, and she smiled. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, we sat on the porch swing, just listening to the crickets. I stared out at the yard, the light strung between the trees, the faint smell of sawdust still on my hands, the quiet hum of a home full of love. I thought back to who I was that night at the restaurant, the man with a glass of wine in his hand and a broken heart in his chest. If only he knew that one day he'd sit here, years later, with someone who saw him for everything he was and nothing he wasn't, that his kids would laugh again, that the silence would stop hurting, and that the best chapters of his story were still ahead. So I sat there on the porch with Emma by my side, her head on my shoulder, and thought to myself, I can't wait to write them.